On Harvest Sunday, my parents handed me a dented $2 gold coin and gave my sister the keys to the family manor. I took that coin to the foothills and started digging. 2 years later, I owned the railroad they desperately needed to save their crops. "We're family," my mother cried. I just flipped that same $2 coin at her feet. I still remember the exact weight of that coin in my hand. Dented on one side, a little scratched near the edge. A $2 gold piece, the kind men used to flip at card tables when they had nothing left to lose. My father pressed it into my palm on a Sunday morning in October, right after the harvest prayer, right in front of every Fletcher who ever drew breath. Aunts, uncles, cousins, ranch hands who'd worked our land for 20 years. He smiled when he gave it to me, like he was doing me a favor. Then he turned to my older sister, Vivienne, reached into the front pocket of his Sunday coat, and handed her a folded paper. She opened it slowly, like she already knew what it was. She probably did. The deed to Sable Creek Ranch, 600 acres of High Plains wheatland, the colonial house with the wraparound porch, the grain barn my grandfather built with his own hands, the water rights to the Sable Creek tributary that ran along the eastern edge. All of it, in her name. My mother, Margaret, stood beside my father with her hands clasped in front of her white church dress. She was smiling too, the kind of smile that has already decided how the story goes. I was 24 years old. I had been managing Sable Creek's accounts since I was 14. I knew every cost, every debt, every dollar that came in and went out. I had renegotiated the grain buyer's contract twice, once after a drought year that nearly broke us, once after my father's back gave out and he couldn't ride the eastern fence line. I had done it without being asked. I had done it without a single word of acknowledgement from either of my parents. And I got a dented $2 coin. The worst part was not the coin. It was the explanation. My father looked at me the way you look at someone. "You genuinely believe you are helping," he said. "Nora, Vivienne is the face of this family. The land needs to stay with someone who can carry the Fletcher name properly. You're the smart one. You'll figure something out. Consider this your seed money." Seed money. $2. Vivienne didn't even look at me. She was already showing the deed to her fiancé, Grant, who had ridden in from Connecticut 3 months earlier, with soft hands and a strong handshake, and nothing else. He didn't know what a water rights clause was. He had never stayed awake past midnight during a lightning storm, praying the grain barn didn't catch fire. But he photographed well at the church social, and apparently that was the qualification my family cared about. I stood there holding that coin for a long time, long enough for everyone to stop watching me and go back to the food, long enough for the humiliation to settle somewhere deep and cold in my chest, below the crying and above the breaking point. I did not cry. I did not argue. I just kept looking at that coin. And then something shifted inside me, quiet as a key, turning in a lock, because I recognized this coin. I had found it. I was 9 years old, digging in the dry creek bed behind the eastern pasture after a flood had pushed everything up from the ground. I ran to my father with it in my hand, so excited I was tripping over my own boots. He turned it over, looked at it once and said, "That's a good omen for the ranch, Nora." Then he put it in his pocket. He kept it for 15 years, and now he was handing it back to me like it was a gift. That coin was not seed money. That coin was a message. You found something valuable once. That was enough. This is all you get. I pocketed it. I picked up my hat from the bench by the door, and I walked out of the house I had spent 10 years keeping solvent. Without saying a single word, I did not look back at the porch. I did not wave at the cousins calling after me. I walked to the stable, saddled my horse, and rode east toward the foothills. I had somewhere to be. The ride to the foothills took 40 minutes. I had done it dozens of times in the past year, always alone, always before sunrise or after dark, so no one from Sable Creek would see me heading east, instead of back toward the ranch. The trail climbed through scrub oak and loose shale until the land opened up at the top of the first ridge, and you could see everything from up there, the valley floor spread out below, the grid of farm roads, the distant smudge of Harrow's Bend to the north, and 3 miles west, the colonial house with its wraparound porch and its American flag and its 600 acres of wheatland that had just been signed over to a woman who had never read a property tax notice in her life. I sat on that ridge for a long time. I was not mourning the ranch. I had never been under any illusion that it would come to me. My mother had been clear about that. In the wordless, consistent way that families communicate the things they will not say directly, since I was old enough to understand the difference between how she spoke to Vivienne and how she spoke to me. Vivienne was introduced at church socials as our daughter. I was introduced as our other one. I had stopped being surprised by it at age 16. I had stopped being hurt by it, mostly, somewhere around 20. What I was doing on that ridge was not grieving. I was calculating. I pulled out a small notebook I kept in my coat pocket. The same notebook I had been filling for 8 months with survey notes, railroad correspondence, land values, and timing estimates. I opened it to the current page. I wrote the date. I wrote, claim filed Monday, meeting request drafted, waiting on reply from Denver. Then I wrote one more line and underlined it twice. Do not tell anyone. Not yet. Not until the paper is signed. I closed the notebook. I looked out at Sable Creek Ranch one more time. The porch light was already on, the silhouettes moving inside behind the lit windows, the sound of the harvest dinner carrying faint and distant up the ridge. I turned my horse back down the trail toward town. What nobody at that harvest table knew, what I had told exactly no one, was that I had already been planning this for 8 months. And the $2 coin was never going to be just seed money. It was going to be evidence. Let me tell you something about the foothills east of Sable Creek. Every rancher in Harrow's Bend County had written them off. Rocky ground, poor soil, no water access. The Dunmore family tried to graze cattle there in 1878 and lost 11 head in one winter to the cold gaps between the ridges. The Pratt brothers sank a test well in 1881 and hit nothing but limestone at 60 feet. By the time I was old enough to understand land, the foothills were considered worthless. The county's dumping ground, the place you pointed at when you wanted to explain bad luck. Nobody bothered to look at them the way I looked at them. 2 years before Harvest Sunday, when I was still managing Sable Creek's accounts, I had taken a part-time job at the Harrow's Bend land office. My mother thought it was beneath me. My father didn't comment. Vivienne told her friends I was working in town like a shop girl. I didn't correct any of them. The job paid almost nothing. That wasn't why I took it. The land office held survey records for every land parcel in the county, going back 40 years. It also held something more important: correspondence from the Continental Spur Line Railroad Company, who had been inching their western rail extension toward our region for 3 years. Everyone in the county knew the railroad was coming. What they didn't know, what they couldn't know, unless they read the survey documents, the way I read them, was where it was coming. The Continental Spur Line needed to cross the high plains and connect to the mining settlements in the Western Territories. The obvious route was straight through the valley floor, through the best farmland in the county. That's what every rancher assumed. That's why men like my father had been holding tight to their flat land and dismissing the foothills as worthless. But the valley floor had a problem. 3 creeks converged in the center of the valley every spring, flooding the ground soft for 6 to 8 weeks. Laying rail through flooded, unstable ground was not just expensive, it was impossible without years of drainage work that the railroad could not afford. The foothills, on the other hand, sat on solid limestone bedrock at a natural elevation that bypassed the flood zone entirely. The terrain was rough, but rough terrain was solvable. Soft ground was not. I found the survey memo in a file folder that had been misfiled under grazing permits instead of railroad correspondence. The memo was from the Continental Spur Line's regional land agent, a man named Theodore Marsh, to the company's head engineer. It was dated 14 months before Harvest Sunday. It said, in plain language, Eastern Foothill Corridor confirmed viable. Limestone base, natural grade suitable for rail construction. Recommend acquisition of right-of-way easements through foothill parcels before land prices reflect railroad proximity. I read that memo 4 times. Then I refolded it exactly as I found it. I put it back in the wrong folder, where it had been sitting for 14 months, unread by everyone except me, and I started making a plan. I want to be honest about what those 8 months looked like, because they were not glamorous. They were not the kind of months you would put in a story if you were trying to make yourself sound bold and certain. Most of them, I was afraid. Not of failing, I had failed quietly at getting my family's recognition for 10 years, and had learned to live with it. I was afraid of hoping for something and being wrong about the numbers, because if I was wrong about the numbers, I had nothing. The claim would expire. The railroad would find another route or another parcel holder, and I would be the woman who had left Sable Creek on Harvest Sunday with a dented coin and a bad idea and come back with nothing to show for it. I ran the survey math 11 times. I ran the railroad route calculations from 3 different angles. I went back to the geological study and checked every footnote. Every time I ran the numbers, they came out the same. The foothill corridor was the only viable route. Parcel 14C was the only parcel that straddled the natural grade in the key section, and the filing cost was exactly $2. The numbers did not lie. Numbers had never lied to me. People had. Land did not. The foothill parcels were selling for almost nothing, between 50 cents and $2 per acre, because nobody wanted them. I had no money of my own. I earned almost nothing at the land office and had been quietly sending a portion of my small salary home to cover the ranch's 3rd quarter tax bill, which my father had forgotten about. Again, so I did what I always did. I studied the problem until I found the angle nobody else was looking at. There was a provision in the county land code, an old one, dating back to the territorial settlement days, that allowed a person to stake a mineral and survey claim on barren, unimproved land for a filing fee of $2. The claim gave you a 12-month exclusive survey, right and first option to purchase at the assessed value, which for foothill land was almost nothing, $2. I started saving. Not toward the coin, I didn't have it yet. I saved in small amounts, kept the money in a tobacco tin behind a loose brick in the land office storage room, and I waited. I needed to time the claim carefully, not too early, before I had the right-of-way leverage, and not too late, after someone else stumbled onto what I'd found. Then came Harvest Sunday. My father handed me the coin I had found as a child, a $2 gold piece, worth exactly enough to file one survey and mineral claim on 40 acres of foothill land that sat directly in the path of the most important infrastructure project the county had ever seen. I don't believe in signs, but I believed in that. What I did not know yet was that Theodore Marsh, the railroad's land agent, had already visited Harrow's Bend once, and he had already asked around about who owned the foothills, and someone had already given him a name, just not mine. I filed the claim on a Monday. The land office clerk, a tired man named Hector who smelled permanently of pipe tobacco, took my $2 without looking up. He stamped the filing form. He wrote, 40 acres, Eastern Foothill Sector, Parcel 14C, in the register. He slid me a carbon copy of the claim and went back to his newspaper. That was it. No ceremony, no acknowledgement. 40 acres of the most strategically positioned land in the county, secured for the price of a bad meal at the Harrow's Bend Saloon. I walked out of that office with the carbon copy folded in my coat pocket, and I felt something I had not felt in years. Not happiness. Exactly. Something quieter and more solid than that. Control. I spent the next 3 weeks doing my own survey of Parcel 14C. I borrowed the land office's survey equipment under the guise of a training exercise. Nobody questioned it, because nobody cared what the bookkeeping girl was doing with equipment they never used anyway. I mapped the terrain myself. I confirmed the limestone bedrock with a hand drill I rented from the Dunmore hardware store for 20 cents a day. I walked the grade line 3 times and marked it with cairnstones. The railroad memo was right. The foothills were perfect. The grade was consistent. The bedrock was solid. The natural corridor through Parcel 14C cut directly between 2 ridges in a line so clean. It almost looked intentional, like the land had been waiting for a rail line for 100 years. A crew could lay track through it in one season if they started in spring. I wrote up my findings in a survey report, clean, formal, the kind of document that looked like it came from an engineering firm, not a 24-year-old woman working at a county land office for $2 a week. I wrote it under the name N. Cole. Cole was my mother's maiden name, which felt like the right kind of irony. Then I wrote a letter to Theodore Marsh at the Continental Spur Line's regional office in Denver. I told him I had completed a private survey of the Eastern Foothill Corridor in Harrow's Bend County. I told him I held an exclusive claim on the key right-of-way parcel. I told him I was prepared to discuss terms. I did not mention that I was a woman. I did not mention Sable Creek. I did not mention my family. I signed it N. Cole, Independent Land Broker, and I listed the land office's post box as my correspondence address. Then I waited. 6 weeks passed. I went back to work at the land office. I did not ride out to Sable Creek. My mother sent word twice, asking me to come for Sunday dinner. I declined both times. I heard through my Aunt Ruth, who was the county's most reliable carrier of information she wasn't supposed to have, that Vivian and Grant were already making plans to expand the south pasture and had hired 2 new ranch hands, expanding. With what money, I did not ask. I had a reasonable guess. The reply from Theodore Marsh arrived on a Thursday morning, addressed to N. Cole at the land office postbox. It was 3 sentences long. Mr. Cole, your survey data is consistent with our internal findings. We would like to meet at your earliest convenience to discuss right-of-way terms for parcel 14C. Please advise when you are available. T. Marsh. Continental Spur Line. Mr. Cole. I read it twice. I folded it. I put it in the tobacco tin with the rest of my records. Then I allowed myself, just for 1 minute, to sit completely still in that storage room and feel the full weight of what was happening. He wanted to meet. The railroad wanted my land. My $2 coin had just become the most important piece of real estate in Harrows Bend County. What I did not know, sitting in that storage room, was that Theodore Marsh had already met with someone else before writing to me. Someone who had told him that the foothill parcels were tied up in a family land dispute and that he should speak to the Fletcher family at Sable Creek Ranch before making any deals. Someone who was trying to cut me out of a deal they didn't even know I was running. Before I tell you what happened at that meeting, drop your location and local time in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world people are watching this story unfold. And if you have not subscribed yet, hit that button, because what comes next changes everything. I had never been to Denver. I had ridden as far as the county seat twice in my life, both times to file land paperwork. Denver was a 2-day train ride east, a city I knew only from the newspapers that came into the land office folded and 3 days late. I saved for 6 weeks to afford the train ticket and 2 nights at a boarding house near the rail offices. I wore my best coat, which was not a particularly good coat, and I pinned my hair up the way my mother had taught me, before she decided my appearance reflected poorly on the Fletcher image. I carried the tobacco tin. I carried the survey report. I carried the carbon copy of my claim on parcel 14C. Theodore Marsh's office was on the 2nd floor of the Continental Spur Line building on Larimer Street. Oak paneling, maps pinned to every wall, the smell of pipe, smoke, and ambition. He was younger than I expected, mid-30s, trim, with the alert eyes of someone who had made a lot of deals and knew how most of them ended. When I walked in, he stood. He looked at me. Then he looked past me, toward the door, expecting someone else. "I'm N. Cole," I said. He sat back down slowly. "Miss Cole. Miss Cole will do. Or just Cole, if you prefer efficiency." He was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, just slightly, and gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Please sit down." I sat. I opened the tobacco tin. I laid the survey report, the claim filing, and a hand-drawn map of parcel 14C on his desk in 3 separate stacks, like I was dealing cards. He looked at the documents for a long time without touching them. Then he looked at me. "You did this survey yourself?" "Twice. The grade measurements are in Appendix B. The bedrock depth readings are in Appendix C. I used the county survey equipment and cross-referenced against the 1879 geological study that your company's own engineers cited in their internal memo of February last year." Another pause. Longer this time. "You've seen our internal memo. It was misfiled at the Harrows Bend Land Office for 14 months. I work there. I found it. He picked up the survey report and began reading. I let him read. I did not fill the silence. My father had always filled silences with explanations. I had learned, over years of watching deals go sideways at the grain office, that explanations were what you gave when you were not sure of your position. I was sure of mine. Theodore Marsh read for 11 minutes. I counted. Then he set the report down and said, "What do you want?" I told him. Not a sale. A lease. A right-of-way lease on parcel 14C, renewable in 10-year terms, plus a 5% stake in the terminus operations at the Harrows Bend Spur Station. In exchange, I would transfer exclusive survey rights and facilitate the county easement filings, which I was positioned to do faster than any outside attorney. He looked at me the way people looked at me when I had done something they hadn't expected. Not admiration, exactly. More like recalibration. I was told, he said carefully, that the foothill parcels in that area were connected to a family dispute, that I should speak to a ranching family named Fletcher before making any commitments in that corridor. There it was. I kept my face still. Who told you that? He hesitated. A man named Grant Whitfield. He said he had recently married into the Fletcher family, and that they had a historical claim on that land. Grant, Vivian's husband, the man with soft hands and a strong handshake. He had come to Denver. He had somehow found out about the railroad's interest in the foothills, and I could only think of one way he could have done that. And he had tried to insert Sable Creek Ranch into a deal that had nothing to do with Sable Creek Ranch. I reached into the tobacco tin and placed the carbon copy of my claim on top of the survey report. Parcel 14C is registered to N. Cole, filed at the Harrows Bend County Land Office on October 14th of this year. I have the only legal claim on this land. The Fletcher family owns Sable Creek Ranch, which is 3 miles west of parcel 14C, and has no survey rights, no claim, and no legal connection to the foothill corridor whatsoever. I paused. Mr. Whitfield is my brother-in-law. He did not know I held this claim because I had not told my family. The land was available. I filed. That is the full history of the situation. Theodore Marsh looked at me for a long moment. Then he did something I had not expected. He laughed. Not unkindly, like a man who had just watched a chess game play out in a way he had not anticipated and found it genuinely interesting. "Miss Cole," he said, "I think we can do business." We signed a preliminary agreement that afternoon. I took the evening train back toward Harrows Bend. I sat in the third-class car with the tobacco tin on my lap, and the preliminary agreement folded inside it. Outside the window, the plains were going dark, the sky turning that deep blue that happens for about 15 minutes before full night. I thought about my father's face at the harvest table. I thought about Vivian opening that deed. I thought about Grant riding to Denver to steal something he did not understand. And I thought, they do not know yet. They still do not know. That window of not knowing was about to close. The railroad does not move quietly. When the Continental Spur Line begins acquiring right-of-way easements in a county, the land office processes the filings. Filings become public record. Public record becomes gossip at the feed store. Gossip becomes fact at the church social. And fact eventually reaches Margaret Fletcher's breakfast table. It took 4 months. I was not in Harrows Bend when the news spread. I had moved to a small room above the land office, which I now occupied as a full employee. Theodore Marsh had written a formal letter to the county land commissioner, recommending my appointment as the Continental Spur Line's local right-of-way liaison, a paid position that came with a title and a salary that was more than twice what Sable Creek's grain income had ever provided me. The room was not much. A single bed, a small iron stove, a window that looked out over the main street. I had a desk under the window and a shelf for books and the tobacco tin. It was the first space I had ever occupied that was entirely mine. No family history in the walls, no expectations built into the floorboards, no unspoken accounting of what I owed and to whom. I slept well there for the first time in years. I had also, in the 4 months since the Denver meeting, done something I had not done before in my life. I had told someone, not about the railroad specifically, the terms required confidentiality until the public filing, but I had told a woman named Clara Brent, who ran the Harrows Bend boarding house and had been quietly watching me work at the land office for 2 years, with the particular attention of someone who recognizes a person navigating a difficult situation with no support. I told her enough. She listened the way people listen when they have no agenda completely, without offering solutions, without reframing the story in more comfortable terms. She said, "When I finished, you did the right thing, and it cost you something real. Both of those things are true." At once, I had thought about that a lot in the months since. The first person from my family to find out was not my father. It was not my mother. It was my Aunt Ruth. Ruth was my mother's younger sister, a woman who operated as the family's unofficial intelligence service without fully understanding that role. She came into the land office on a Tuesday morning, ostensibly to renew a grazing permit, and stopped dead when she saw the framed Continental Spur Line authorization certificate on the wall behind my desk. My name was on it, N. Cole Fletcher, which I had used for the formal appointment because a full legal name was required. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she looked at me, then back at the certificate. "Nora," she said quietly, "is that yours?" "Yes." "And the railroad the N. Cole that Grant went to Denver about was me?" "Yes." She sat down in the chair across from my desk without being invited. Her grazing permit renewal was forgotten entirely. "How long?" she said. "The claim was filed the day after Harvest Sunday. The preliminary agreement was signed 6 weeks later." Ruth was quiet for a long time. She was doing math in her head. I could see it, working backward from what she knew, filling in the gaps. Her expression cycled through surprise, then confusion, then something I had not expected. A slow, quiet respect that she seemed slightly embarrassed to be feeling. "Does your mother know?" "Not yet. Grant has been telling people he's managing a railroad negotiation. He told your father he had contacts at Continental Spur." "Grant has no contacts at Continental Spur. He came to Denver and told Theodore Marsh that the Fletcher family had a historical claim on land that belongs to me. Mr. Marsh told me about the conversation in our first meeting." Ruth closed her eyes briefly. "Vivienne doesn't know either, does she? I imagine she knows what Grant told her." Another long silence. "The terminus," Ruth said. "The spur station. That's on your land?" "The right-of-way corridor runs through parcel 14C, which I hold. The station depot will be built at the northern end of the parcel, which is the natural convergence point for the 3 main farm roads in the county. Every rancher who wants to move crops to rail will move through that depot, including Sable Creek. Including Sable Creek. Ruth looked at her hands for a moment. Then she looked up at me with an expression I had never seen from anyone in my family before. Not pity, not dismissal, not the careful management of expectations that was Margaret Fletcher's primary parenting tool. She looked at me like she was genuinely seeing me for the first time. "She's going to come here, you know," Ruth said. "Your mother. When she finds out, she will come here." "I know. What are you going to do?" I thought about that for a moment. About my father's voice at the harvest table. Seed money for your own path. About my mother's folded hands in her white church dress. About the deed handed to Vivienne. About the coin that had traveled from a dry creek bed into my father's pocket and back into my hand, with 15 years of silence in between. "I'm going to do what I always did," I said. "I'm going to run the books fairly." Ruth nodded slowly. She picked up her hat from her lap and turned it in her hands. "Your grandmother used to say that the Fletcher women always paid their debts and collected what was owed. She meant it about money. I think she meant it about other things too." She stood. "I think you turned out to be more Fletcher than any of us realized." She left without filing the grazing permit. She forgot about it entirely. She came back 2 days later and filed it without mentioning the conversation, which was, I had come to understand. Ruth's way of saying she was on my side without saying anything that could be repeated at Sunday dinner. Ruth told my mother that same evening. I know because the following morning, when I arrived at the land office at 7 o'clock, there was a letter already waiting on my desk. It had been slipped under the door during the night. It was in my mother's handwriting. It said only, "We need to talk. The harvest is coming, and the roads are closed to us without the depot. You are still our daughter. Come home." I placed the letter in the tobacco tin. I set the tobacco tin on the corner of my desk, and I went to work. The harvest came in the second week of September. It was a good harvest. One of the best the county had seen in years. The spring rains had been steady. The summer heat had not broken early. And the wheat came in heavy and dry, the kind of crop that could make a ranching family's year. Under different circumstances, the Fletchers would have had reason to celebrate. But the old eastern wagon road that connected Sable Creek to the original grain depot had washed out in the spring floods, exactly as I had calculated it would. The flooding was not a surprise. It had been flooding in cycles for 20 years. What had changed was that the original depot was now closed, redirected to serve the Continental Spur Line's new terminus at my parcel 14C. Every farm family in the county had already negotiated their depot access contracts through my office. They had done it months earlier, at standard commercial rates, with standard terms. I had processed 41 contracts. They were fair. They were the same for everyone. Sable Creek was the only holding in the county that had not filed. Grant had told my father, apparently, that he had a contact at the railroad who would arrange preferential terms. He had said this for months. He had said it so confidently, for so long, that my father had not bothered to file through the standard process. Why pay standard rates when your son-in-law knows people? On the second day of harvest week, my mother came. She did not come alone. She brought my father, who looked older than I remembered and moved more carefully than he used to. She brought Vivienne, who sat in the carriage and did not come inside. She did not bring Grant, which told me everything about how the last few weeks had gone at Sable Creek. I was on the depot platform when the carriage arrived. I had been expecting it for 3 days. My mother stepped down from the carriage with her best posture and her church social face composed, careful, already managing the narrative before a word had been spoken. She was wearing her good boots. She had dressed for this. My father followed. He looked at the depot building, at the Continental Spur Line signage, at the rail line running north through the foothill corridor. He looked at it the way you look at something that requires a fundamental restructuring of your understanding of a situation you thought you had fully mapped. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me. I walked to the end of the platform and waited. My mother reached me first. She was already talking before she finished climbing the platform steps. "Nora, this has gone far enough. The harvest cannot wait. Sable Creek has 400 tons of wheat with nowhere to go. We need depot access, and we need it before the first frost. You are our daughter. We are family." I let her finish. Then I reached into my coat pocket. I placed the dented $2 gold coin on the platform railing between us. I did not flip it. I did not throw it. I did not throw it. I set it down carefully, with both hands, the way you set down something that has been carrying weight for a long time. My mother looked at the coin. She recognized it. I watched her face change. "You gave me my path," I said. I took it. I did not say anything else about the coin. There was nothing else to say. My father had come up behind her. He was looking at the coin on the railing with an expression I could not fully read, something between recognition and a kind of grief that had no clean name. "Nora," he said. "Dad, I didn't..." He stopped. Started again. "I didn't know you had found the railroad. You didn't ask what I was doing." He didn't answer. His jaw moved, but nothing came out. It was the same expression, I realized, that he'd had when he handed the deed to Vivienne, a man who had made a decision and was only now beginning to understand what it had cost. My mother recovered first. She always did. The past is the past. Right now we have 400 tons of wheat. Whatever the rate is, we will pay it. Same as everyone else. I looked at her for a long moment. "Same as everyone else," I said. "Yes." She flinched. Just slightly. She had expected the rate to be punitive. Or she had expected me to offer them a family arrangement that made the whole situation feel like something other than what it was. She had not expected me to say the same as everyone else, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world, because that was what she could not bear. Not the commercial rate itself, but the equality of it, being treated exactly the same as the 40 other ranching families who had not thrown their daughter out with a $2 coin. I filed their depot access contract that afternoon. Standard terms. Standard rate. I processed it the same way I processed every other filing. Sable Creek's wheat made it to rail before the frost. My parents drove home without stopping for supper. Vivienne did not get out of the carriage. I watched them go from the platform, and I felt none of the things I had thought I would feel. Not triumph, not grief, not the particular hollow ache of a wound that has finally been acknowledged. Just the quiet, steady feeling of a ledger that has been balanced. What happened next? What happened to Grant? What happened to Sable Creek in the winter that followed? And what happened the one time my father came back alone I had not planned for? Because some things you cannot plan. Some things find you. Grant Whitfield left before the first snow. I heard it from Ruth, who heard it from the new ranch hand at Sable Creek, who heard it from Vivienne herself on the morning she found the note on the kitchen table. Grant had taken the carriage, most of the household savings account that he had consolidated into his name after the wedding, and the business contact ledger he had been building for 2 years, all those connections he claimed to have, all those people he said he knew in Denver and back east. He was gone before anyone woke up. Vivienne found out 2 days later when she tried to withdraw money from the Harrows Bend Bank and was told the joint account had been closed. She found out a week after that when a man from the Denver land office came to Sable Creek with a letter informing my father that Grant had attempted and failed to file a retroactive claim on Parcel 14C using a forged power of attorney document in the Wader Liath, my father's name. The claim had been rejected immediately. Theodore Marsh's office had flagged it and forwarded the paperwork to the county sheriff. I was informed as the parcel holder. I did not press charges, not because I forgave it, because pressing charges would have required dragging my father's name through the county court for a document he had never signed and knew nothing about, and I was not willing to do that to him. I sent a formal letter to the Denver land office, noting that the claim was fraudulent and that I declined to pursue legal action. And I asked them to close the matter. They did. That was the last official thing connected to Grant Whitfield. Vivienne wrote me a letter in November. It was 3 pages long, and I will not recount all of it. But the center of it was this. She had not known. She had not known about the Denver visit, about the forged document, about any of it. She had believed, genuinely, that Grant had a legitimate railroad contact and that he was handling it. She wrote that she understood if I did not believe her, and that she would not ask me for anything. She wrote that she was sorry, not for the deed, not for Harvest Sunday. She did not have the self-awareness yet to be sorry for those things. She was sorry for Grant. I believed her about not knowing. I wrote back 2 sentences. I believe you. Take care of yourself. I did not offer more than that. Some things cannot be fixed quickly, and pretending they can is its own kind of dishonesty. My father came in December, alone. He rode up to the land office on a gray morning when there was thin ice on the water troughs and his breath was misting in the cold air. He tied his horse at the post outside and came in and sat down across from my desk without saying anything for a long time. Long enough for me to finish the document I was working on and set it aside. He looked at the authorization certificate on the wall for a while. Then he looked at me. "I've been trying to figure out when I went wrong," he said. "I've been trying to figure it out since October." I waited. "I think," he said slowly, "I think I confused quiet with not caring. You never asked for much. You never made noise. I thought that meant you were fine." He paused. "I think I was wrong about that." He did not say he was sorry for Harvest Sunday. He did not say he was sorry for the coin. My father was a man who had spent 60 years building a version of himself that did not do those things easily, and I had long since stopped expecting them. But he said what he could say, and he rode out to the land office in December to say it, which was more than I had expected. "The ranch is going to be difficult without Grant's money," I said, "not to wound him. Practically. I know. The depot rates are fair. You'll make it through the spring if the planting is right. I know that too." He looked down at his hands. "I'm not here to ask for anything, Nora. I just wanted to see that you were all right." I thought about that for a moment. About the 24-year-old girl who had walked out of that harvest dinner with a dented coin and no plan except one she had been building in secret for 8 months. About the tobacco tin behind the loose brick. About the train to Denver, the third-class car, the planes going dark out the window. "I'm all right," I said. And I meant it in a way I had not meant anything in a long time. He nodded once. He stood. He picked up his hat from the desk edge. And then he did something I had not seen him do since I was very small. He reached into his coat pocket and put something on my desk. It was not the coin. He didn't have it anymore, I did. He put down a photograph. Small, worn at the corners, clearly old. It was a photograph of a 9-year-old girl in muddy boots, standing in a dry creek bed, holding up a $2 gold coin with the biggest grin you've ever seen on a child's face. He had kept the photograph. All those years, he had kept the photograph of the moment I found the coin in a creek bed behind the pasture on a summer afternoon when the whole world was still possible. I stared at it for a long time. When I looked up, he was already at the door. "You always were the smart one," he said. Not the way he'd said it at the harvest table, like a consolation prize, like a fact he was only now saying out loud after knowing it for a very long time. Then he was gone. The Continental Spur Line's Harrow's Bend terminus opened the following April. The ceremony was small. Theodore Marsh, 3 county commissioners, and about 40 ranchers who had all, at some point in the previous 18 months, renegotiated their grain transport arrangements through my office. There was a ribbon, there was a speech, there was the sound of the first locomotive coming through the foothill corridor, through Parcel 14C, through the limestone bedrock that everyone had written off for 20 years. I stood on the platform and watched it come. Ruth was there. She had brought her husband and both her children. She stood next to me and didn't say anything, which was unusual for Ruth, but felt right. I had the coin in my pocket, the same dented $2 gold piece, the one I had found at 9 and gotten back at 24. I had carried it every day since Harvest Sunday, not as a reminder of what had been done to me, but as a record of what I had done with it. The locomotive came through the gap in the ridgeline, exactly where the natural grade opened up, exactly where I had walked it 3 times with survey stakes and a hand drill, and nothing but the knowledge that I had read the right document at the right time and acted on it when everyone else was still assuming the obvious. It was loud and enormous, and it smelled like iron and coal smoke, and the specific future you build when you stop waiting for someone to hand it to you. Theodore Marsh shook my hand on the platform after the ribbon was cut. He had brought 3 engineers from Denver who had worked the foothill survey crew through the winter, and they stood in a row in their good coats, looking slightly out of place against the backdrop of the high plains and the scrub oak ridgeline. One of them asked me, with what seemed like genuine curiosity, how I had found the corridor without a proper engineering team. "I read the right document," I said. He nodded seriously, like that was a satisfying technical answer. Maybe it was. Clara Brent was there too. She had closed the boarding house for the morning and walked the half-mile to the terminus in her practical boots, and she stood at the back of the small crowd with her arms crossed and a look on her face that was not sentimental, but was something close to proud. When I caught her eye across the platform, she gave me one slow nod. That was enough. Ruth had brought her youngest daughter, a girl of about 8, who was deeply uninterested in the locomotive and very interested in whether there were any pies at the ceremony. There were not. Ruth apologized to her and then came to stand beside me. Your mother stayed home, she said quietly. I know. She wanted to come. She just couldn't figure out how. I thought about that. About Margaret Fletcher standing in the kitchen at Sable Creek, in her good boots, trying to find the shape of a gesture that would let her be present at her daughter's ceremony without having to account for the harvest table, for the deed, for 15 years of a particular kind of silence. Some people can find that shape. Some cannot. My mother was not built for public revisions of a story she had already told. She knows where I am, I said. Ruth nodded. Her daughter tugged at her sleeve, asking about the locomotive's wheels. The ceremony ended. The ranchers drifted back to their wagons. The engineers went to find lunch in Harrow's Bend. Theodore Marsh gave me a firm handshake and a formal acknowledgement of the first-year operations review that was coming in the spring. And then, he too was gone. I stood on the empty platform alone for a few minutes after everyone had left. The locomotive had pulled north through the corridor and was already out of sight, making its run toward the connecting line at the county border. The rail gleamed in the cold light. The foothills rose on either side of the cut, limestone faces pale and solid and utterly indifferent. The wayland is not cruel, not kind, just present and available to whoever shows up with the right information and the nerve to act on it. I took the coin out of my pocket. I looked at it, once dented side, scratched edge, the faint impression of the date on the face. Then I closed my hand around it, not to keep forever, not as a trophy, as a reminder of a very simple truth that had taken me 24 years and one harvest dinner to fully understand. The people who hand you your path have no idea where it goes. Only you do. That's my story. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below which moment hit you hardest. Was it the harvest table, the meeting in Denver, or the photograph at the end? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you know someone who has been handed the smallest piece of the table and told it's enough, share this with them. There is a full playlist of stories like this one in the description. I will see you in the next one.